gonna happen is like
Yes.
people are gonna be 5 minutes late.
Okay.
Gonna wait for that.
Yeah.
And then I will introduce you, and then I will hand over the mic
Okay.
to you.
Sounds good.
So it'll
Sounds
be
good.
pretty quick, and then yeah, just like it's your time, you know, however long you want or short you want it to be, and then at the end, if you're willing, we'll just open the floor for some Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there might also be some here, and then I can, let's see. So, oh, actually, Jimon, can you help her like Okay, very good. Okay, so hi everyone. So we will be starting in a couple more minutes to our Zoom attendees. We're just waiting for people in 3D to also slowly stroll in. So thank you for your patience. Awesome. Can everyone hear me? Very good. And the people on Zoom, audio, all good? Double checking. Okay, very good. So thanks again so much for being here today. I am Cindy Cow. I'm the assistant professor in human-centered design and director of the Hybrid Body Lab. And today we're very, very honored to have with us Morgan Chen right here next to me. And the Zoom folks, she's gonna take center stage in just a minute and I'll get off. So Morgan is a multidisciplinary designer. She did her undergraduate training actually in journalism from USC. However, as we know, USC is in close proximity to Hollywood, etc., and also very vibrant, I would say, cinema culture there. So Morgan also started to gain a lot of experience, starting by helping out with a lot of movie sets, right, and also doing a lot of the makeup for these film sets. And she was later able to actually establish her own makeup practice. And later on, Morgan got interested in thinking about, I would say, like this relationship of the body and technology and what that means, right? And so she went on to pursue her master's program at the ITP program at NYU. And for us, this is a very exciting for our lab. So with funding from the NSF and also the Engaged Research Grant from the College of Human Ecology, we're able to invite a pool of artists to apply for residency in our lab. And Morgan, I think heralding the first one, I think is just a great representation of this integration of technology and really thinking about, I think, different mediums, right? Not just as analog versus digital, but really what the relationship actually means, right? With the human body in this era, right? Where it's kind of inescapable and as technology permeates. And so Morgan is at the very start of her artist residency, and she has very kindly agreed to give this artist talk. So this talk is going to focus on her current work and some of her representative projects looking at makeup practices. And towards the end of her residency, which will be the week of August 15th, she will be delivering another talk about the project that she will be creating in the lab. And so look out for announcements for that talk as well. And we will also have physical as well as Zoom options. And so without further ado, I want to welcome Morgan Chen to center stage. Awesome. Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you, Cindy. Oh, should I use this mic? Yes. Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Oh, is it working?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Okay, hi, thank you so much, Cindy, for that introduction. My name is Morgan. I am the Hybrid Body Lab Artist in Residence for 2022. And today I'll share a little bit about my practice and my research interests and intentions. This is a presentation that I've entitled Deconstructing Material Beauty. So to start off and introduce myself, I am a makeup artist. My visual work has largely revolved around designing for makeup and the body. Here are some images from my makeup practice. So as Cindy touched on, I started out in makeup when I was an undergraduate at USC. It's a big film school, and like a lot of USC students and people in LA, I started to work on sets during my free time. And I've always been interested in makeup. I mostly did it on myself up until that point, but I would like work in theater in high school. So I was always interested in this idea of creating characters through makeup and through clothing. So a lot of people are intrigued by this project in particular, so I thought I'd just play a little bit of this video. This was a project called Simulacra that I worked on and I did the makeup for. This was a very involved process, by far the most difficult body paints that I've had to do. Not really due to its complexity, but rather the sheer surface area that you'll see in a minute. There's some dancers where I had to cover every inch of their skin. The soles of their feet, the armpits, every fold, crack, crevice, in between the toes. And because they were dancing, all of these areas constantly needed to be retouched since they were moving, and there's a lot of movement in this. There are two dancers in this video, and both of them combined with, and it wasn't just me painting alone, because at some point I realized that I needed a lot of like extra hands. But both of these dancers combined, like to get into makeup took 4 hours. So that's a little bit about that project. So my makeup work is primarily in character makeup for independent film. I usually work out of kit, which means everything I do on set and on the job. I am a body painter and a character designer. This is a film that I did recently where I created this Korean Grim Reaper character. So I've come to learn how makeup not only allows for character building as perceived by an audience, but also to create a sense of character identity for the actor or performer. Whether it's a subtle trait like a crooked eyebrow, or it's something more prominent like a broken nose, pallid skin, makeup can bridge the gap between the actor and the character and create something believable. My makeup practice is almost completely self-taught. So basically how I learned is as I work, I've spent a lot of time getting to know materials. The more that I use them, the more I understood them, which paints to use for the face and which to use for the body, which eyeshadows to blend and which I had to press in, which adhesives were the strongest lasting and the fastest drying, what percentage of isopropyl alcohol to use to paint a tattoo, and which to clean my makeup brushes. For Hybrid Body Lab last week, I was able to share some of these materials and knowledge as a part of my residency. And through compiling a lot of them, I realized sort of the knowledge base that I had built up. And I also shared a lot of the materials that I don't like to use as well. So I've created my own sort of kit through process of just like continuously working with materials. So what do I mean when I say the word or say the phrase deconstructing material? To me, the deconstruction of material means to find meaning and purpose in its function. My practice is very materially based, like makeup, and my work is informed by these materials that I use. I find commonality and metaphors within materials and myself, and I use these materials as a tool to build identity or to understand my own identity sometimes. So during the pandemic, I found myself like others with work at a pause. So I went to grad school at NYU for 2 years, where I shifted my focus a bit from painting on the skin to deconstructing the body and expressing identity through different materials. So this is a project that I called Losing Teeth, in which I thought about the deconstruction of the body as a whole into its parts. So to explain, at the time, I was having a lot of stress and anxiety around my body, emotionally and physically, which manifested itself in a lot of ways, but specifically in one way, into these nightmares where my teeth would fall out in a lot of different scenarios. It's actually quite a common anxiety dream. Maybe some of you here have had dreams about your teeth falling out. And it was like very, very common for me, but like in every time it would be a different sort of dream. So I thought a lot about the symbolism of teeth. What does it mean in our American culture? How socially we expect everyone to have every single tooth as a sign of good health. We pay money to get our natural teeth bleached, straightened, and aligned. We'll get fake teeth if we're missing a few, or we'll cover them up if we have weak or imperfect ones. So to me, thinking about the tooth or the teeth, even teeth removed from the body, were a representation of the body itself, how it changes, and its limitations. So I took this dental model, which I guess is used for like dentistry students, and some conductive paint. I created a simple circuit on each row of teeth, so that when pulled, each tooth would play a different audio recording of a person talking about their anxiety around the body. So a little demonstration here. None of the videos are supposed to have sound, just so it doesn't get too loud. But this was not the first time I've done a media project that involved collecting audio. I studied journalism in undergrad, so I'm quite familiar with how to ask certain questions, listening through audio to find a sound bite that fits, one that I can bend or craft or cut to fit my narrative. However, as I often felt when I was studying journalism, with this project, I felt a certain sense of guilt, which I wrote about when documenting the project. I felt as though I was taking so much intimate confessional audio from people, from subjects, and I depended on their bravery and courage and boldness and vulnerability to propel my own projects, to find and create my purpose. So as an addition, in order to sort of address that, I ended up like adding to the project, where I added my own audio, allowing myself the chance to also think about my body and to be vulnerable in that aspect. I wrote, it seemed only fair. I didn't place my audio above anyone else's. I'm just another tooth in a row of them. My audio blends in with the rest. Here's another interesting thing that I worked on in grad school. So more recently, I started to work with a biomaterial in class called Bacterial Cellulose. It's also commonly known as the SCOBY, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. So I liked it so much that it became my thesis project for my grad program. If any of you have tried to brew kombucha before, this is essentially the byproduct of fermenting tea. So how you make it is you have some sweet tea and you add a starter culture of acetic acid bacteria, yeast, and other microbial populations. This can even be like a store-bought kombucha as long as it's not pasteurized. Within 2 to 3 days, these aerobic cultures will start to assemble at the surface and produce a biofilm, which is called bacterial cellulose, and it has pretty much the same chemical makeup as like plant cellulose. And I was interested in using this as a biomaterial. So I grew a lot of it because I wanted to have lots of material to work with and to observe. I got these under the bed storage bins that I purchased from Target specifically to grow scobies. And I started to stack them under my tables, under the bed. I really started to pay attention to this material, and I watched it grow to the shape of its container every time. The texture, thickness, color changed based on what inoculation of tea I was feeding it. And I also watched some of it mold, which at first I was really upset about, but then I grew to really appreciate it as a pattern or state of being. I documented all of this and wrote notes on all of my findings. I even made like a little Instagram account for the SCOBY. There are several different states of SCOBY that I defined as one, the inoculation of the starter culture into the tea, which when you put it in, it just kind of looks like tea. Then a few days later, the initial growing of the SCOBY culture, which causes bubbles and starts to seal them into a biofilm at the surface, and it creates this pebbled surface texture. And then eventually it'll grow and grow into a visible SCOBY, which is a really thick, cloudy, and rubbery mat, which I would then usually harvest by putting it out and letting it dry. I know it looks really crazy. So as I did this, I realized that drying would significantly shrink the thickness of the material. Bacterial cellulose is hydrophilic, so really once water is dried up, you're left with like a thin, sometimes flexible material. Growing a lot of this material led me to research and observe its properties and states. I like that it looks like flesh and it's very gross and visceral. I liked that it had a lot of tensile strength when wet. It's hard to puncture. It was also transportable, I found, because it could be dehydrated and rehydrated. So thinking about SCOBY as a material and deconstructing it into different states gave it the context I needed for my work. I found a lot of commonality in between my life and the SCOBY, and I worked with it in several different ways. So I used it in different contexts, wet and dry, for different effects, and I watched as it encased or fused with the objects I put inside. But I wasn't only interested with working with the bacterial cellulose film itself. I also thought about the context of the tea and the liquid. So as a part of my thesis project for my grad program, Culturing, I grew a SCOBY in a glass tank as a living sculpture to represent racial dissociation and melancholia that I felt. It's a concept written about by David L. Eng and Shin-Hee Han in a 2019 book of case studies on the pattern of collective grief in the young Asian American individual. So the book speaks on how the Asian American individual becomes a subject that is split between these conflicting identities and expectations. So through this project, I deconstructed the idea of culture, which is passing on for generations how to live and survive symbiotically into this literal microbial culture. I used the properties of the tank and the SCOBY to play with this idea of conflicting identities and two environments. The confines inherent of a home in like a traditional, maybe inherited culture, and the external fabric of Western society. Pulling these apart causes a tear in the forming structure, which in the book is referred to as a psychic split. I also created a short film with this material called Amniotic Fluid that juxtaposed the idea of the SCOBY growing in containers with my, at the time, disorderly apartment in Brooklyn. I just perpetually felt this sense of rootslessness and displacement, and that really showed in my apartment. And I thought about how, as I was growing these SCOBYs in my apartment in this place, I was also thinking about myself growing in my container. I also started to use the SCOBY in a speculative design context as masks and makeup and artifacts for future societies. So I started this project with my friend Echo Tong, who is an F1 visa holder and international student. The name of the project, Secondary Inspection, comes from the name of the process at the US borders in which a US custom officer will stop a visitor and place them into a secondary inspection room to check their documents. This process can be highly discriminatory and stressful to the traveler. So in this speculative project, we thought about what a human society would look like if it didn't have categories of race and gender. How would we differentiate, categorize, but also, like humans are wont to do, discriminate? And we played this with this idea of the gut microbial environment inspired by the SCOBY, once again, deconstructing what it means to be human into the organisms or cells that make us. Even when creating a new identity, a passport through speculative design and fiction, I aim to think about our current society and create parallels to illuminate its limitations and regressions. So if a society is oppressive, there's always countercultures pushing back. So I thought about ways in which worn fashion like masks and makeup could and have been used to express identity, protest, and resistance throughout history and also in this speculative world. So this is like some of my like face filter work, which I'll touch upon later. But I initially designed these to be 3D models for face filters. But I ended up printing them and turning them into the bones of more wearable sculptural works with SCOBY. I utilized dried SCOBY strips and rehydrated them so that they were pliable and laid them onto these structures to create this like leather-like otherworldly appearance. So as you can see, my work kind of builds on itself in that my ideas are influenced and informed by materials and the context that we give them. I also tried putting it on my face as a sort of like secondary skin or makeup. This is something that I'm still currently working on. So going back to makeup. So there's this book I own, Stage Makeup by Richard Carson. It was originally published in 1942. It's meant as a guide for aspiring actors to paint their own faces for the stage. I own the 1999 version, which is the one on the left, the 8th edition, a thrift store find. It's still hailed as the Bible of stage makeup to this day, and it is a required read for many makeup programs and courses. It's been republished as late as 2018, the one on the right, the 11th edition, which you can see here, with maybe the removal of some of its more damning practices. I show this book to say that the education of makeup artistry exists largely unchanged, with the same application, techniques, and materials being taught throughout decades of cosmetic practice, how to use them, where to apply them. A lot of it is the same. So perhaps as we begin to reinvent some of these uses for makeup and body art, we start to deconstruct these rules of use and find new identities through material. I often say that my existence is inherently tied to the contradictory experience of being Asian American and a child of first-generation immigrants. A lot of my work centers around identity, my identity in specifically this way, how I felt desired and undesired in different contexts, how I have inherited history and lost it, how I am both foreign and domestic. While I cannot speak for everyone, for my own practice of decolonization, it is important for me to deconstruct identity and look at things in parts to understand them. So material is the way that I use to communicate and visualize these practices. Makeup to me is a temporary, sometimes volatile, melting, dynamic piece of expression on the skin. While it might not always reach under the surface, it is the visual perception and the first impression of identity. Makeup is how I personally articulate feelings or emotions, and it is the tool that I use to build identity, not only for characters in film, but also for myself. So as an extension of makeup that I've been experimenting with, this is a digital makeup in the form of avatars. This is Unreal Engine, and here are some face filters. These are stuff that I applied to Hybrid Body Lab with, and I'm by no means an expert in any of these like digital makeup areas, but it's something that I am interested in and experimenting with. And then you can see some of these face filters that I worked on in action here. So through creating things like digital avatars, I often think about the context of using technology. Do we blur the lines between what we consider identity, faces, bodies, likenesses, Queerness. Does beauty change? Will we think of the body as separate parts instead of one whole? And are those that we consider other still othered in these digital worlds? As we build new models and outlets for expressing beauty and identity, it is important to consider the power and privilege that comes with doing so. So what does it mean to create an avatar identity that is a person of color, a queer body, a disabled body? These likenesses don't come without their context in the real world. And that's something that I've tried to think about when exploring these things, and it's thoughts that I've had often. So this is Shuru Graham, and a rendered influencer supermodel. This is her creator, who makes money off of her. This is a 2022 Love, Death, Robots episode, really popular, called Hibaro. It's by Spanish director Alberto Mielgo. It's undoubtedly a cinematic marvel. It's a fully rendered animation with stunningly lifelike rendering. When I watched this episode, other than its like beauty, it left me with a deep feeling of uneasiness, not like the uncanny valley feeling of uneasiness, but more like about this sort of, is more than the normal amount of hypersexualization and male gaze in cinema. And so I looked up Mielgo and read some interviews that he had on his work. And he said it was very much based on folklore of different countries like India, North Africa, and Eastern Europe, with all sorts of jewelry and assets that women wear in many tribes or cultures. The idea was to create a woman that is so full of gold and treasure that you almost don't see a woman behind it. It's basically just the beauty that is in front of you. So this is no more apparent than when he talks about the name of the episode, which is Hibaro, and has a very specific meaning to the Puerto Rican people and a national identity. And he just says, I just think it's a cool, catchy name. It sounds sort of exotic for some reason, so I wanted to stick with it. This is another popular 2019 episode of Love, Death, Robots, also by Mielgo, The Witness. It features its main character, a young Hong Kong strip dancer who believes she witnesses a murder. She runs around the streets in this episode of Hong Kong in her flowing high heels and robe, something like I couldn't really help but laugh at when I watched it recently. The opening shot shows her laying on her back, breasts exposed, nude, and covered in blood. It's an unforgettable image and disturbing in its unabashed sense of violence and fetishization. How many people's minds has this image of an Asian woman crossed without so much of a question because she is a rendered character? Even renderings have their own real world likenesses, and because of that, their implications. And I should mention that this image has been reproduced as a makeup trend throughout social media. This is Miyako. I can't help but think about the ways in which marginalized groups have been created as images of profit throughout history, and whose likenesses will continue to be profited off of as we move into digitalized renders and AI characters and CGI, or new ways of CGI. It is not enough to create beauty with no responsibilities. It is important to challenge the Orientalist, colonial, exploitative, and othering fantasies as we move into new and increasingly digital forms of beauty and transformation. The future of beauty is not without its weight, and it's important to deconstruct the material. And by this, in this context, I mean the cultural imagery and context that we have in front of us as well. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Cindy, Jingwan, and the Hybrid Body Lab for today, the panelists that read my proposal and application and decided to give me a chance, Ray, Yuping Su, Lulu Curry, that were my references, and my sister, my family, and my friends that have collaborated with me and supported me throughout my practice. Thank you very much. Hello?
Any questions for Morgan?
Sure. So I've already learned so many techniques that the Hybrid Body Lab has really thoroughly established. I'm really inspired by how much they've like pushed this idea of technology on skin and how dedicated they are to it. So I've learned a lot of things from that. I've made many duo skin flash tattoos, which is something that I kind of want to incorporate in my own makeup practice, like making flash tattoos and like experimenting with designs. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I am learning and will continue to learn throughout this residency. Can you say that one more time? Sorry, I missed.
Can you speak further how makeup and public department and how
Right. So I think there's a lot of sort of ways in which makeup fabricates identity. Like I mentioned, for actors, putting makeup on your skin can change sort of the way you feel about yourself even before you start acting. It puts you into character. And for like everyday makeup wearers, I think there's like the sense of maybe not that you're undone without makeup, but it like creates this sort of confidence for a lot of everyday people. And those are like, I think some very like surface level ways that makeup creates identity. For myself, makeup is something that I've always been interested in and have played with. And so I think I've like developed this identity also like in a secondary way as a makeup artist, working with these materials and getting to know them and like creating my own sort of way of working and my sort of knowledge base or kit of different materials that I like to work with and I prefer to work with, that I've luckily gotten to share with some with Hybrid Body Lab and will continue to collaborate on. Yes.
You've shown your work to a lot of people, and I'm curious what feedback that you've gotten from people that have seen it, and what they've found from it, and also what's the overarching message that's
Sure. So I think I probably showed like a very like wide range of different things that I've tried. I know the SCOBY is usually what elicits the most reactions because it looks so weird and it's like it's actually pretty cool because it's being used as a new biomaterial in like labs and stuff, and people are using it as like as replacements for food wrap or for disposable things. So I think there's like a lot of interest in that. In terms of like identity or some of my work that deals with that, I think that the response is mostly that sort of there's like this vulnerability that comes with sharing a lot of these things that I've kind of had to learn to do. And I think there's a lot of the best like feeling for me is when someone connects to it, even if they might not be from the same background. I have gotten people that come up to me and tell me like the culturing, the SCOBY project relates a lot to my my Latin American mother or something. And so there's always like, I think like how I find commonality between myself and materials, people kind of find commonality between like when they see these projects and they kind of see sometimes they see themselves in these things. Yeah. Thank you for your question. Yes. Yes. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's like if we think of makeup as a material, I can't like not ignore the implications of like beauty standards and how makeup is maybe used to sort of conform people to certain beauty standards. So I definitely recognize the ways in which sort of makeup has been repressive. I think it's also like the material itself has different contexts. So like, for example, red lipstick originally was thought of as like promiscuous or like for like sex workers or dancers or like, you know, strip dancers. And then later in I'm pretty sure it's World War II, it became, or no, sorry. During the suffragette movement, the suffragettes would use red lipstick as sort of the symbol of like of rebellion. So I think that in a lot of ways, depending on the context, it sort of changes and can be used as like repression and also as protest. And people have like burned red lipstick as well in protest of beauty ideals. So I think that it's important to think about beauty standards and to think about ways in which we can deconstruct them and to be mindful of them. And then as to like how it affects character makeup, I would say that it's a good question. I don't think I think about beauty standards too much when I'm creating a character, unless it's like integral to the character. But there are definitely like with all the makeup rules and like the books and stuff, they always teach you like certain things, certain rules based on like beauty standards. They're all created like off of like symmetry of the face or anatomy of the face. So that's something that I also kind of am interested in, like subverting or exploring the subversion of that. Yes.
Experience as an artist,
The best piece of advice. I think for me, like something that my sister has taught me that I have to think about a lot is I often have like so many ideas. As you can see, like there's like a lot of like different things that I've tried, and it's sometimes hard for me to articulate all of them in a way that makes sense. Like I cannot explain to you how long this presentation took me to write because I was really trying to understand sort of the through line through all of it. So I think probably the biggest piece of advice that I've gotten is to like in like practice and in work is to figure out like what the meaning is and where like how it connects to like a larger body of work and how you can articulate that in a way that like makes the most or like that allows people to understand it the way I do essentially. Yes.
So one is I was, I'm very curious about how you collaborate.
Yeah.
Because you collaborate with these huge film sets, right?
Yeah.
Theater performances and a certain release number. And you want to really forward. And so yeah, I'm very curious if you have advice for how to collaborate with people from backgrounds and also what has that been like?
Right. Yeah, collaboration is a big part in all of the things that you mentioned. In a lot of ways, I think for me, like I collaborate best when there's like good open communication, and I'll also like be honest where I can be. Like I'll be honest about like what I can do, what I can understand. And if I don't understand something or something doesn't make sense, I will ask for clarification. And so it's important to maintain communication in that way when collaborating. There's like so many times in which like for something like film, I get communicated, somebody tells me their idea for makeup and I design it. And you know, there's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes the director won't like it. And so I'll have to start sometimes from scratch, or, you know, they'll add something and maybe I'll like disagree with it and we can like talk it out. And I'll be like, maybe this doesn't work because the dancer needs to, you know, put their hands on the floor. So the hands, like, you can't paint this part, kind of a thing. So I think collaboration, there's a lot of sort of back and forth that needs to happen in order to create like, the best possible work.
With that, let's give Morgan another round of applause for and thanks to everyone for joining physically and also on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining. And also thanks a lot to our department chair, Yasser here, for also coming and for supporting our residency. So thank you. Thank you so much. And so we will have a final talk on Morgan's Artist in Residence project around mid-August. So please look out for that. And then, yeah, so I think, you know, this gives us like a really good intro into Morgan's work. And I think we're just very, very excited to see how she also helps us as a lab think about technology and on-body design in a different way. And so thank you all again for attending and enjoy the wonderful weather. And also for the Zoomers, wherever you are. Okay, bye.
Thank you all.